1 2. Check 1 2. Let us get it. Let's go freaking good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go and check out another game. Another Endgame. From tomorrow, I'm gonna start uploading those videos of 25 tips that I showed y'all. Nice download video of 25 tips for Grandmaster Endgame tips. Let's see. Let's talk about winning and converting the material advantage into force wins. The win concepts could be Lucena Position, tactical discipline, and I'll say the acronym K.K.S.S. So very simply, the game I won this for the extra rookie night. But any most critical skill for an individual is knowing how to win when you only have a rook and a pawn. The position is golden standard. The K.K.S.S position is golden standard for this, or the opposite for the field. The objective is this: when the king is trapped from the pass pawn in 8th rank, you must build a bridge with your rook to shield the king from check so you can come out. So let us get started with this game, and then I'm going to become some analysis and try to give an example of it. So I am the black pieces, and my opponent the white pieces. My opponent starts with e4, fighting for the light squares. Right, oh, that just shows the time. Okay, so e4, e5, standard king's pawn opening, fighting for pawn, fighting for dark squares, opponent fighting for light squares. Knight c3, fighting for freaking the opposite color for light squares. Playing the Vienna game. I go symmetrical and play the max lane defense, which honestly I didn't know. I just want to symmetrically match him. We played the 3 knights. I transfer to 3 knights, and I go bishop b4. Sort of a reversible Lopez type setup and formation. Then it goes a3. And I go with more of a rerouting of my bishop, the Rulli Lopez theory, but applying that opening theory moves, but to this different pawn structure to a 3 knights game. So on a5, my objective is to target the a2 pawn. My opponent goes b4, which gives me that. I'm always being mindful of a6 to stop that pawn storm, and or to potentially go a7. However, no, a5. However, I do not want to snipe this outpost immediately, so h6 is a better move. And then eventually we can stack and fight on this flank side with the rook, which was one of my ideas at first. However, I saw the knight outpost and I disregarded it. So, my home was bishop c4, activating the bishop. And now I'm just slightly better. I go on f6, just developing, fighting for the light squares. And I see the structural weaknesses immediately for what they call for white. The queen side pawn structure is just garbage. The king gets castled, however, I had pressure on the freaking f7 pawn, and I have a I would say it's unclear why black is better here. In the sense of the best thing black can do is go pawn to d4, pawn to d5, to strike at the center and immediately go for a tactical exchange, which I didn't calculate at all. I was thinking maybe play more positionally, play freaking d3 and get the dark square bishop out to support the knight invertedly. I thought my opponent would do this, to go like this and keep this here. So, however, I decided to castle and lose and gain myself almost a point of advantage, estimately. Now, also one of the key things is they have the fire leverage attack. However, I can trade off this. Like if my opponent decides to take, and I get great compensation. Why? The compensation, the reason why that says I'm winning is because I'm up a pawn. These structural weaknesses, this terrible bishop, and the king's not castle, giving me about 2 points of advantage. And I have a very clear deadly outpost here too, because the knight is blocking this pawn. And I can make some forcing moves with relative pins. I can always have access to the f7 square. And my king is in a bunkhouse-like state, but it's playing the important defensive role, guarding the g7 pawn and defending the knight, which is putting pressure on this pawn. But I thought it would. But even though you're saying, "Oh, I'm losing a rook," the compensation is I take away the bishop pair, and I get an important, and I get my king active too, relatively in this. But the king is overall safe. So my opponent plays d4. And I just see I go pawn to I go pawn to d6, simply opening up the dark light square bishop and simply taking the entire diagonal, pointing towards the king. Beautiful bishop pair, doing his shot well. King castles, and now I strike with to d bishop to freaking d4 check, and my opponent goes rook f2, which I cut off, but she just blunders the rook. If the king were to move out of the way, oh my days. And this is the yep. So it goes rook f2, which just blunders the rook. Even though I give away the bishop pair, my opponent were to move to h1, as it would be. It would be better for me. I was saying I was taking the knight, getting a tempo on the rook, potentially like putting itself here or here. I'll put it here because it defends the bishop, and it simply should. Nah, that would be a worse spot. It would probably be best to put on the b file. It would be best to put on the b file, and that was my idea to calculate here, rook scoot, and then even potentially get my bishop out and go for a pawn break in the center. Bishop to, but no, that wouldn't be right because I don't want to trade up the bishop pair because he would takes, and the pawn takes, but that would open up my rook. Okay, so now play. I go bishop f2 check, king takes, then I go knight g5, and then I go knight, pawn to h6, kicking out the knight. I check with the knight, king scoots, I slide over rook e1. My opponent takes my free pawn. I'm sacrificing this pawn to go to liquidate and simplify. I do a beautiful trade, taking knight for knight and damaging the pawn structure. Takes, and now my idea is pretty simple to strike in the center to get my bishop over, get my rook left active. Even so, immediately I go bishop e6, offering a trade of bishops. My opponent puts a beautiful outpost, so I decide to chop away at the outpost and give access full dominance for me for the e file, and I can reroute my knight pretty clearly. I go queen a5, which my opponent blunt punishes my inaccuracy by wasting a tempo. I put pressure on the pawn. My opponent offers trade of rooks. I simplify, take stakes. Now I'm just up. Now, yeah, I'm just up a rook or a minor piece. Now I check, king scoots, and I trade off the queen. So now it's a rook, knight, and rook versus a 3-2 pawn majority, and I double pawns on the D file, and a 2-3 pawn majority. So it's rook and knight, and I have access to the open file. So I immediately reroute my knight to try to get outposts potentially on C5, potentially potentially D potentially D5, potentially C5. However, I just take easy, go rook e1, taking the open file, pawn push, and I immediately come back and put my pawns on dark squares to put a beautiful outpost, potentially my knight in the future on e5. My opponent pushes pawn, wasting just valuable time. I root my knight, and I'm playing very quickly right now. I decide to go for a different outpost right here on g5. But at first, I do an intermediate move, attacking the pawn, extraying both of those bishops. So now it's just, and then I go for a fork, a winning fork. So bishop takes and sacrifices itself. I take up the pawn. Bishop attacks my rook. I take that last pawn, and all I do is put my rook on the opposite color squares. I put my knight on a beautiful outpost. Bishop scoots. I push my a pawn. Takes, and I get an outside pass past a pawn, which I just check the king. King scoots, push, scoot, push, scoot, push. And I pick this square of promotion. Why do I put a1 at the promotion square? Because the bishop is a light square, and my opponent, my all my pieces are on dark squares and my bishop's on the light square. So its relative value is just nothing. It's literally nothing. So king scoots over. I run over to the dark square, defending the knight invertedly. King scoots, promote, and then now I just simply liquidate right here. Wait, I flew a final move where my opponent just moves his king because of time trouble. I take, trade off the queen, and then it's just a completely winning endgame. And then just move, scoot, and then he runs out of time. All my goal is going to be to gobble up the E and D pawns, get my king up there, get the E pawn, run the king, and just get one of these pass spawns and promote, and just simply have this knight outpost potentially reroute itself here to harass the king, and it was a very clear textbook plan. So that was a 48 move game, according to Winchester. Shout out to him. Beautiful game analysis. I got about almost a 90% accuracy. I made 3 estimate mistakes, which okay, so wait, no, I was black, so no, I only had two. Okay, I only had one mistake, which is not rerouting the knight quicker at the end game, and I only had 2 inaccuracies, which you saw my opponent punish one of that. The inaccuracy in the clinical sense is always a way. There's always a way to punish it. I believe you saw in the recent video talking about how to punish inaccuracies, which is basically just refusing the move, paraphylactics, and there was one more. I gotta review my study, guys. So the point is, I won this game because of extra rook and knight. But the most critical skill for any student was the Lucena Position, the gold standard for this. While my king was trapped and found passed on the 8th rank, I must build a bridge. Where the order shoot your king, so your opponent can check. But I do an opposite and do an offensive Lucena position, abusing the color complex and my rook going all on dark squares and bishop on light squares. So now, when your king is trapped from your pawn, and I'm going to show you the example position, you must build a bridge with your rook and shield your king from check so you can run off the enemy king. Use your rook, keep your opponent's king at least 1 file away from the pawn. And use the fourth rank bridge. Move your rook to the fourth rank, rook f4, with a bridge height. Step out the king out of the promotion square. The opponent will start checking you with the rook, and then you build the bridge. March your king towards the enemy rook. When the final check comes, you block the check with your own rook on the fourth rank. And we're going to go over this position too. Make sure it's not fundamentally set it up correctly. No, let's not say this. The AI is just talking stupid. Clear in this house, so that's not working. I'll myself that. Well, yeah, I understand the complexity is the enemy of execution. In chess, especially when I play a queen or a rook, it's called keep it simple, stupid. International National Library. My husband made up that freaking acronym. K.K.S.S. Kilo SS. Sierra Sierra. I made up into a more new acronym, which America loves their acronyms. It's called K.K.S.S. So kill the counterplay, keep the thing safe, simplify to win, and stay sharp and alert. Into a tactical insurance policy. Principle 1 is kill the counterplay. The tactical application is trade off every piece that your opponent has left. Why it matters, 0 pieces cannot create a tactic or a mistake or you could blunder. Just in case. Don't let your king trap in the corner or a random check. Simplify to win. Don't look for fancy mate if a simple one exists. Move 44, Queen D1 was very keep it simple, stupid action, removing your last piece, major piece. Treat every game if the game is even. Prevent winning side complacency and hallucinations. The master, keep it stupid or kill the counterplay, keep the thing safe, simplify to win, stay alert. It's in a position where you can estimate 3 pawns versus with a set position of a rook and 3 pawns versus an opponent with a knight and 1 pawn. You're not allowed to checkmate into the opponent has 0 pieces and 0 pawns left on the board. Your goal is to force your trade the rook and knight and use your pieces to cap the last pawn safety. My instinct of removing the final mirror piece at the ending game is perfect for application of this acronym, K.K.S.S. K.K.S.S. Stripping the opponent of their last tool, a close support upon the miracle comeback or miracle draw. Combining this aggression with tactical bridge or preparing a leg up, it would be a nightmare. The end game. Alright, and now let's talk about the 8-minute margin. While my opponent entered a deep time trouble and changed the nature of keep it stupid simple. Keep it stupid simple. Okay, SSS. Oh my god. Why does it keep different references? In combat, if you have total 5 superior and the enemy is pinned, you don't rest blindly. You liberate and overall precision. The same way in chess. When you have time crushing like that, you have the luxury of double verification. Number one, you have double verification on your clock rate. I have time to find a force mate, or practical reality of playing. For queen for bishop, I remove the only